A year ago, I was about to marry the love of my life, until a simple break revealed her true character. I remember it was a warm April afternoon. The sun was streaming through the window into our living room, lighting up the wedding invitations we had left on the table. The dress was ready. The ring sparkled inside its box. And me, I had no idea that everything I believed to be real was about to collapse. Renata and I had been together for 4 years. We weren't perfect, of course, but we were one of those couples people envied. We always laughed together, planned trips, talked about kids, about the future, or at least that's what I thought. When I proposed to her, I did it convinced that there was no one else in the world I'd rather grow old with. But life, sometimes, wakes you up with a sharp blow. And it's not just the betrayal that hurts. It's the naivety. It's the belief. It's the realization that you were invisible at the exact moment you thought you were shining the brightest. It's like someone turning off the light in the most important room of your life, and you're left blinking in the dark, searching for a door that no longer exists. I don't know if anyone's ever made you feel like that, like a spectator of your own story, watching everything you built fall apart and being powerless to stop it. I lived that. I felt it. I cried it. And today, after everything that happened, I'm going to tell you about it. Not so you'll pity me, but because I know there's someone out there who needs to hear this. Maybe you. Maybe something similar has happened to you. Maybe you're in a relationship where you no longer feel seen, where your words echo like voices in an empty cave. Or maybe you just need a sign to let go of what's hurting you. Whatever your case may be, stay. This story isn't just about a canceled wedding. It's about love, disappointment, dignity, and about how I found myself again after hitting rock bottom. And if you've ever felt invisible in your own relationship, this story is for you. Subscribe if you want to hear more real stories, unfiltered, from people who fell, but learned how to rise again. Because sometimes, what seems like an ending is really just the first chapter of a new version of you. And to understand the impact, I first need to tell you why it hurt so much. Because when something breaks, the pain doesn't come only from the shattering. It comes from everything you thought was solid before it fell apart. Renata and I met in college. She was studying graphic design, and I was in communications. We first saw each other during a group presentation that neither of us wanted to do. And somehow, through nervous laughs and PowerPoint mistakes, we started talking. At first, it was coffee between classes, then long walks around campus, and suddenly, we were celebrating our first anniversary on a beach getaway she planned as a surprise. For 4 years, we were inseparable. The kind of couple that finishes each other's sentences, that can look at one another in a crowded room and understand everything without saying a word. We traveled a lot, shared a small apartment that we turned into our sanctuary, cooked special dinners to watch Sunday movies. It was more than love. It was true companionship. And I'm not saying that out of cheap nostalgia. I say it because in that moment, I felt it with all my being. She was my person. The proposal was like everything with her. Intimate, simple, but full of meaning. I asked her to marry me on our rooftop, right under the same stars where we had our first kiss. She cried. She hugged me like she'd never let go. She said yes through quiet sobs. And I thought I had touched the sky. In time, we started planning everything. The wedding, our life, our long-term dreams. There was no rush, only certainty. And yet, like a silent crack that forms without breaking the concrete just yet, one night I noticed something strange. Renata started hiding when she used her phone. Sometimes she'd step out to the balcony for calls that ended the moment I approached. Other times, she'd leave her phone face down and react with subtle nervousness when I asked, "Everything okay?" But you don't suspect someone you love. You don't want to see ghosts in the daylight. I thought maybe she was stressed. Maybe she was planning something for me. A surprise, a gift, or maybe she just needed space. I told myself that over and over. I convinced myself that was it. Because when you trust, you do it with your eyes closed. And back then, Renata was the place where I trusted being blind the most. But we already know that cracks, even tiny ones, eventually split wide open. At first, the illusion remained intact. We planned every wedding detail like it was a sacred project. Renata had a little notebook where she jotted down ideas, sketched the dress, clipped magazine pictures, picked out flower colors. It was her world, and I loved seeing her so excited. There was something magical about how she talked about our day. We picked out a venue surrounded by gardens. We loved the idea of getting married outdoors, with the sunset light falling over us and our guests. She insisted the flowers be seasonal, because that has more soul, she told me once. Even the menu was carefully chosen. A vegan option included, thinking of her sister Laura, who hadn't eaten meat in years. Nothing was left to chance. Every decision had a purpose, a meaning, a little "this is us." I remember we even had a small argument about the music. I wanted something more classic. She preferred something more indie. And after some laughs, we settled on a middle ground playlist. Things like that, simple, everyday decisions, but filled with emotion. At the time, everything seemed perfect, or at least, that's what I wanted to believe. Because it didn't take more than a month before something in Renata began to change. Meetings with the florist, the DJ, the menu tastings, suddenly she couldn't go. She said she was tired, that work was overwhelming, that she trusted me to make the decisions. And at first, I didn't take it badly. I thought, okay, she's burned out. It's normal, weddings are stressful. But then it got to the point where she didn't even ask how the meeting went, didn't show the slightest interest in the choices. I'd come home with catalogs, quotes, 1,000 options, and she'd just mumble, "Whatever you think, Santiago. Whatever you think." That phrase started to hurt more than I expected, because what you want is to share, not just execute. I didn't want to organize a wedding. I wanted to build a moment with her, together. But every time I tried to bring her back into the process, it felt like she pulled away even more. Not in a violent or direct way. It was subtler, like suddenly, what we were building together just didn't matter to her anymore. And you know what's the most frustrating part? That you start justifying the unjustifiable. I told myself she was going through something personal, that it had nothing to do with me, that maybe she just needed space. I became an expert at making excuses for her absence, even to myself. Because when you love someone, your biggest fear is being right about something that could break you. And despite everything, I stayed. Picking out flowers, signing contracts, making guest lists, waiting for her to emotionally return to the place I was still in. The place where I believed we both still were. But I was getting more and more alone by the day. And then came the moment when everything stopped being subtle. Because the signs were no longer tiny cracks, they were full-on tremors. And even though I held on to the idea that this was just a phase, a passing cloud, Renata was already in a different storm, one I didn't even know existed. It was a weeknight, after dinner. She was acting strange, quieter than usual. I was talking about the menu I had finalized with the venue's chef that day, and the wedding favors I'd sent to print, when suddenly, she interrupted me. "Santiago, I need to talk to you," she said, eyes fixed on the floor, unable to look me in the eye. And that was it. That moment you never forget, because in a matter of seconds, everything you thought was solid begins to shake. She told me she needed some time, that her sister Laura was going through an emotional crisis, that she didn't want to get into details, but she was going to stay with her for a couple of weeks to support her, that I shouldn't worry, that everything would be fine, that a little break would do us good. And I didn't know what to say. I didn't understand anything. A break? Now, weeks before the wedding, after everything we had planned, after 4 years of building a life together, the worst part wasn't the excuse. The worst part was how she said it. Like it was nothing, like I should just accept it and move on. As if what we had could be put on pause without consequences. But what truly froze me was her suitcase. It was small, ridiculously small, not even enough room for 2 weeks of clothes. No extra outfit, no toiletry bag, nothing added up. It was like she just wanted to run, like the reason was something else entirely, and she wasn't even trying to hide it. I watched her walk out the door. No kiss, no glance to ease the pain, no real promise of coming back. Just a dry, take care. The first few days, I tried not to lose my mind. She sent short messages. All good. I'm with Laura. Today was a tough day. Don't worry about me. And even though they weren't warm, at least they existed. I clung to every word like they were proof that something still remained between us. But then, silence. She stopped writing. Her last reply was a "we'll talk later." That never came. And after that, nothing. No messages, no calls, no activity on social media. She closed her Instagram. She didn't answer WhatsApp. It was like she had vanished. And that's when I broke. Because there's nothing more desperate than loving someone who erases themselves without explanation. I spent hours staring at my phone, hoping a message would appear. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to check if she was online. I'd call, hang up, call again. I talked to myself, answered my own questions, told myself, she's just busy, she'll say something soon, while my heart screamed, something's not right. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. All I did was think, replay everything, search for where I went wrong, when it all fell apart. Was it me? Did I pressure her? Did I stop listening? I blamed myself for her absence, not knowing that the emptiness she left wasn't because of anything I did, but because of everything she was hiding. But at the time, I didn't know that. I was just a man, alone, abandoned in the middle of his own wedding preparations, wondering how the hell you're supposed to move on when the person who promised to stay is already gone. They say when something hurts that much, your body goes into autopilot. And I think that's what happened to me. Because after a week without any sign of Renata, I stopped feeling. I just acted. I got up, forced down some breakfast even though I wasn't hungry, showered even though I didn't want to, and then sat in front of my phone, waiting, day after day. But when the silence became unbearable, I realized I had to do something. Not for her, for me. I needed to understand what was going on, even if it hurt. So I started with the obvious. I called her sister, Laura. She was evasive. She answered with a cold tone, like my call was bothering her. I asked if Renata was okay, if she was still with her, if I could talk to her. She told me she didn't know much, that Renata had gone out for a few days, hadn't given her details, and probably just needed space. Then came the silence. That awkward pause that says more than any word ever could. I hung up feeling even more alone, but that's when I decided to widen the circle. I called Esteban, her cousin. He and I got along well. We had gone out a few times together, even talked about doing a couple's trip in the future. I figured asking him if he knew anything wouldn't seem too desperate. And there it was, without even realizing it. He let the truth slip. Oh yeah, I saw her the other day. She was with Adrian. Remember him? The one who was her ex back in college. They looked weird. I didn't know how to react. My body froze, but my mind started racing 1,000 miles an hour. Adrian. How had I not thought of him before? How had I not connected the dots sooner? Because of course now everything made sense. Weeks earlier, I had heard Renata talking on the phone in the kitchen, thinking I was asleep. She mentioned that name, barely a whisper. I don't know, Adrian. It's not as easy as you think. I got up to get some water right at that moment, and she hung up immediately. She told me it was a coworker with personal problems. And I believed her. Because I wanted to believe her. Because I'd rather doubt my ears than her loyalty. But there it was. That name. Adrian. Tearing me apart from the mouth of her own cousin. Like an echo from the past coming back to steal my present. And suddenly, everything that hadn't made sense started to come together like pieces of a puzzle I had refused to solve. Her tiny suitcase, her lack of contact, her distant attitude, her emotional absence even before she left. It wasn't her sister. It wasn't a crisis. It was him, Adrian, the ghost from the past, a door she had apparently never fully closed. I stared into space after that call. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't break anything. I just sat on the edge of the bed and whispered, "She's cheating on me." And saying it out loud was like spitting out a poison that had already been spreading through me from the inside. And even though I didn't want more answers, I knew I couldn't stop now. Because when the soul starts to suspect, the body needs proof to justify the pain. After that call with Esteban, I couldn't keep waiting. It wasn't just about her silence or my suspicions anymore. Now there was a name, a face, a story being replayed behind my back. I spent that entire night without sleep, phone in hand, chest on fire. Because imagining the worst is one thing. Facing it with names and details is another. The next morning, I grabbed my car keys and drove to her parents' house. I didn't call. I didn't ask. I was no longer the understanding fiancé, no longer searching for soft explanations or sugar-coated answers. The only thing I needed was to look her in the eye and confirm what I already knew. I remember when I arrived, my heart was pounding so loud, I felt like it could be heard from outside. I rang the doorbell once. That was enough. Her mother opened the door, and the look on her face said everything. She froze. No greeting, no warm gesture, just panic, as if instead of me, guilt itself had shown up on her doorstep. "Is Renata here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated, looked toward the inside of the house, as if searching for time or an excuse. And before she could say anything else, I saw her. Renata was coming down the stairs slowly, her hair loose, no makeup, in pajamas, but it wasn't the clothes that hurt. It was her expression. She looked at me like she never expected to see me again, like I wasn't part of her life, like the interruption of her new world was an inconvenience. "What are you doing here?" was all she said. That question shattered me, because it wasn't Santiago, or "Are you okay?" or even "I'm sorry." It was just a defense, an attempt to keep her new universe intact. I walked in. I didn't ask for permission anymore. "So it was true," I said. "Adrian, he was the plan, wasn't he?" She didn't deny it. She sat down on the couch, arms crossed, as if she had already resigned herself to having this conversation. "I needed time to understand what I was feeling," she said without looking at me. And lying to me was part of that process, leaving without warning, disappearing, letting me keep planning a wedding alone while you played around with your past. She didn't respond immediately. She shrugged, and then, as if lifting a weight off her shoulders, she said it. "I want to know if I still felt something for him." I didn't know if what we had was love or just habit. I got confused. What a simple phrase to justify so much damage. As if my sleepless nights, the unanswered calls, the anxiety, the pain, the humiliation were a reasonable price for her emotional curiosity. "And while you were exploring your feelings," I said, my voice breaking but steady, "I stayed behind like an idiot, waiting for you to come back, waiting for you to choose me." She stayed silent, and in that moment, I realized I didn't need to hear anything else. I didn't need her to apologize or to explain every detail, because she had already done everything, erased me without remorse, and now confirmed, without guilt, that I had only ever been a pause, a parenthesis in her story. And so, without shouting, without drama, I knew our story was over. She didn't defend herself, didn't yell, didn't even try to convince me things weren't how they seemed. She just sat there, arms crossed, trying to hold on to a version of herself that no one believed anymore. Not even her. I, on the other hand, had a storm inside me. I was tired of thinking about what I did wrong, how I could have avoided all of this, whether I was too trusting or too blind. But the truth was, it wasn't about any of that. It was about the fact that she didn't choose me. She didn't even have the courage to tell me. She left me on pause while she played with her past, as if my life were just an intermission in her story. So I said it. Do you know what it feels like to not be enough? I told her. No need to yell. I'm not your backup plan, Renata. I never was. But you treated me like I was. Like I was just here to pick up your pieces when the other guy failed. She didn't respond. Maybe because she knew it was true. Maybe because there were no lies left that could hold up. I took the ring out of my pocket. I had brought it with me that day like someone carrying a symbol of what could have been, or what I naively thought it was. I held it in my hand for a few seconds. It was simple, made of crystal, with small details I had chosen myself, thinking of her love for delicate things, for fragile beauty. And then I understood everything. This ring, I murmured, looking at it one last time, is just like you, beautiful on the outside, but made of glass. Fine, fragile, and broken before it even fell. I set it on the table, slowly, without a sound. I didn't need drama. The gesture spoke for itself. The metaphor formed on its own in my mind, as if suddenly everything made sense. Our promises were as fragile as that ring, and her lies just as transparent. I turned and walked away. There were no hugs, no begging, just a long, cold silence that finally freed me from waiting for something that was never coming back. After leaving that house, with the echo of my own words still ringing in my chest, the first thing I felt was a brutal emptiness. There were no shouts, no slammed doors, no movie scenes. Just that silence that settles in when something dies quietly. Something you had cared for so dearly suddenly ceases to exist. And even though I was no longer with Renata, I still had to get rid of the remnants of what I once dreamed of with her. Reality hit me hard when I was forced to start canceling everything. The flowers, the catering, the invitations, and of course the venue. I remember that phone call like it was yesterday. I dialed the number with trembling hands. On the other end, a kind woman answered with a professional tone, but she quickly picked up on the tone in my voice. I barely said, "I need to cancel a wedding," and she replied with a phrase that pierced me inside. "Yes, sir, we understand. It happens a lot. It happens a lot." As if what, for me, was a personal tragedy was just part of their protocol. As if failed love already came with instructions for being filed away. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the phone like it was speaking to me. That call, simple as it was one of the most humiliating moments of my life. Amid the chaos, there was someone who held me up without saying much. My Aunt Clara. She had always been like a second mother to me. One of those people who don't give speeches, but whose words reach exactly where you need them. She saw me arrive at her house with my soul in pieces and didn't ask anything. She just opened her arms. I cried on her shoulder like I hadn't cried in years. I let myself fall apart without fear of looking weak, because in that moment, I was. After a while, she gently pulled away, looked me in the eyes, and said something I've never forgotten. Cowards come back when they realize what they've lost. And although I didn't know at the time, those words would turn out to be almost prophetic. Because yes, Renata came back. But that is another story. Months went by. Not many, but enough for the pain to change shape. At first, everything was a whirlwind of questions, of memories that appeared uninvited, of sleepless nights replaying every conversation with Renata, searching for clues, signs, anything to tell me when she stopped loving me. But with time, the whirlwind turned into silence. And in that silence, I began to rebuild myself. It wasn't easy. It wasn't fast. But I started to understand that life goes on, even when you feel like you can't go on with it. And just when the air started to feel a little lighter, she came back. On an ordinary afternoon, a day with no warnings, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and there she was. Renata, standing there like nothing had happened, wearing the same perfume, with that look of someone coming to reclaim something she still believes belongs to her. She was holding a folder filled with papers, photos, fabric samples, and the most surreal part, She was talking about dresses and catering, as if she hadn't burned everything to the ground. "I've been thinking about the flowers," she said. "Maybe we could go with lilies instead of orchids. They're more symbolic, don't you think?" I stood in silence, staring at her. I couldn't tell if she was serious or if this was some kind of cruel joke. But no, she genuinely believed she could come back, as if time had stopped right before she betrayed me. As if I had been standing there waiting for her, arms open, frozen in that final moment. "Adrian wasn't what I expected," she said, lowering her gaze. "I made a mistake, Santiago." And that's when, for the first time, I laughed. Not with joy, no. It was that bitter laugh that comes when there's no resentment left, only disbelief. "So what am I then?" I replied. "Your second choice. Your plan B." I didn't wait for her answer. I didn't need to. I was no longer the broken man who had walked away with a ring in his hand. Not anymore. Renata stood at the door for a few more seconds, as if waiting for me to invite her in. But that house, like my life, no longer had space for her. After that absurd visit, I thought, naively, that Renata had understood, that her attempt to return without facing the consequences had failed, and that she wouldn't come looking for me again. But I was wrong. Her goodbye at the door wasn't the end. It was the beginning of an even more confusing chapter. At first, it was random messages, contextless phrases that arrived late at night. "Do you still like vanilla coffee? I heard our song today." I ignored them all. Then came the emails, the messages from unknown numbers, even a new Instagram account that followed only me and posted love quotes with black and white photos. And then the letters began. Yes, letters. Handwritten, left on the windshield of my car. One said, "I miss your scent. Your side of the bed is still cold." Another I found simply read, "You have no idea how much it hurts to have lost you. Adrian was a mistake. We were real." But the worst part wasn't the words. It was her presence. I saw her once at the supermarket. It wasn't a coincidence. I knew it. She was walking behind me with an empty basket, pretending to look at shelves without actually seeing anything. I turned around, looked her straight in the eyes, and she just lowered her gaze and walked away without saying a single word. That's when I understood it wasn't about love. It was about control, about not accepting that this time, the ending wasn't hers to write. That this time, I was the one closing the door. It wasn't easy, but I had a right to her. Not a sentimental message, not a plea, not an explanation. Just one line, cold, necessary. "If I see you near me again, I will call the police." There was no reply. She never wrote again. She never showed up again. And in that final silence, I found what I had been searching for all along: peace. Sometimes, the hardest part isn't letting go of someone. It's letting go of the idea of who you thought that person was. Renata didn't just break an engagement. She shattered an image, a future I had built in my mind, piece by piece. And at first, I blamed myself. I thought maybe it was me. Maybe there was something I failed to give, something I failed to see. But over time, with everything I'd lived through, I understood something that changed me forever. If someone doubts you, they don't deserve to watch you choose them. Because real love shouldn't feel like a constant test, like a competition against ghosts from the past, like a war where one gives everything and the other only measures how much they can take before walking away. Real love doesn't come with fire drills. It doesn't need breaks to see what else is out there. It doesn't disappear only to return when it's convenient. And I was about to marry someone who confused love with convenience. Today, I look back and I don't feel hate. I feel relief. Because I could have built a life on a foundation of lies, but I didn't. I could have accepted being the consolation prize for someone who never fully chose me, but I decided to choose myself. And if you listening to this have ever felt invisible in your own relationship, if you've ever had to beg for attention, for respect, for love, I want you to know you deserve more. So much more. Have you ever felt invisible? Like you were giving everything while the other person was barely present? Tell me in the comments. I'm listening. And if this story touched something deep inside you, subscribe. Because here, we talk about the things most people keep silent. Because healing also happens in community. See you in the next story.